Welcome back to the debate. We're, of course, going to now be moving on to our third segment, in which we're going to be talking about what unfortunately has been happening in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. This, of course, has been one of the worst human rights violations that have been happening for so long. And then, of course, with regards to the kind of struggle that the Kashmiri people have put up for so many decades, that is, of course, commendable. But in terms of the abuses that the people have suffered, and the way that the situation has deteriorated, we'd like to take a look at what has been going on in the Indian occupied valley for quite some time now, just to get a picture of what is happening and then what is important in terms of the Universal Periodic Review. Let's take a look at this package and we'll be right back.
India, which is the largest secular democracy of the world, has been under the strict scrutiny of the international human rights organizations and other concerned bodies. And with every passing day, the findings of these organizations give harsh blows to the gregarious claims of India being a true democratic or secular entity. People of Kashmir had rendered unparalleled sacrifices for securing their inalienable right to self-determination. India's escalating repression of Kashmiris has rendered Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir as the most dreaded prison of the world. India is one of the states to be reviewed by the UPR working group during its upcoming session, taking place from 7th to 18th of November, which marks the beginning of UPR fourth cycle. During the third cycle of UPR in 2017, India was handed over 250 recommendations to improve its human rights record. India accepted 152. India has failed to uphold its commitments and make progress in any of the areas of concern. Despite strong protests from human rights organizations, including the United Nations and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, the Indian government has failed to address the key human rights concerns expressed during Third Universal Periodic Review. In the recent development, all parties Hurriyat Conference's constituent organizations have said that the Kashmiri people must remain vigilant to ensure that no person and group should dare to come forward to cooperate with the Bharatiya Janata Party-led Indian fascist government to further the Hindutva agenda of right-wing RSS in the territory. Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir remains world's most militarized zones, where Kashmiris are facing an unending ordeal of terror and trauma. Hence, United Nations must conclude its review in accordance with information in the reports of independent human rights experts and Kashmiri freedom groups.
Well, you heard the report, and of course this means that this is an important review that is going to be held tomorrow by Nepal, Sudan and Netherlands under the UN Human Rights Council. And this Universal Periodic Review Working Group is of course something that has recommended and analyzed the situation in the past as well. This will be the fourth cycle. But of course the important question again depends upon what exactly will be the consequence of this particular review. How exactly will the world be able to ensure that the recommendations are followed and that India is at the end of the day held accountable for the human rights violations and abuses that are going on in the territory, because unfortunately since decades we have seen that this has continued to happen. Before we of course begin the conversation around what is going to be the result of this particular review, it's important to also look at where we stand now and how far the Kashmiri struggle movement has also come in, starting from many years ago, to the kind of unilateral decisions that came about in 2019, and then to the demographic changes that have happened, and of course the kind of draconian laws that now exist in one of the most militarized zones of the world. For this and more, let me also welcome in the show a senior Hurriyat leader, Mr. Altaf Hussain Wani, who's joined us online. Thank you very much, Wani Sahab, for being with us and being a part of the debate. Let me start with you in terms of the kind of resilience that the Kashmiri struggle has shown in the wake of such atrocities. It is, of course, quite admirable, and generations have, of course, faced this particular problem with reference to what is going on within the territory by the Indian occupation forces, and unfortunately they shouldn't have had to. But when we take a look at what has happened internationally and the kind of conversations around what is going on in Kashmir, it's important to understand the significance of the Universal Periodic Review to the Kashmiri struggle movement. So in your opinion, when you take a look at how the world has responded or taken up the issue of the Kashmiri struggle, what exactly do you think is going to be the significance of the review tomorrow? And in light of what had been the previous reviews and how much they have impacted the Kashmiri struggle. What sort of benefit do you hope for, and do you think can be possible from this?
Thank you, Sana, for having me. Let me tell you, the last 3 cycles of UPR, which I have witnessed personally and have been part of those UPRs and have submitted parallel reports to all these UPRs. The UPR process, which was initiated back in 2006 when the Human Rights Council came into existence, it was thought that it will be a better mechanism in order to scrutinize the human rights situation of the member states of the United Nations and thereby promote and protect human rights universally. But what we have seen when I talk about Indian UPR, in your report you told that in the last 3rd cycle of UPR, India was handed over 252 recommendations. She accepted 152. But looking at the graph which different organizations have maintained, only 5 of the recommendations out of 52, India has to somehow implement it, and that too are about that transgender and lesbian and gay rights. That is the only thing where they have moved forward to something. On the other things, they have not done. They have not moved a single inch. They even did not notice some of the recommendations from the council. I knew that there are 2 parts of the international pressure. That's one is civil society. Civil society, all the civil societies, even just during this 4th cycle of UPR, more than 200 international civil society groups have submitted their parallel reports calling for the government of India to improve its human rights record, calling on government of India to ratify the Convention Against Torture, Convention Against Enforced Disappearances, repeal Armed Force Separation Power Act, Public Safety Act, and National Security Act, and also abolish death penalty, and also ratify the optional protocols of the civil and political rights and economic and social cultural rights. But unfortunately, what we see, India is not. India accepted these things, but has not implemented any of these things. What we saw from the international community, which we call the member states and the observer states in the council, they put some questions to the government of India. They have asked the government of India again these questions, but there is no pressure from these, and this mechanism to me has failed to make any of the country accountable for its crimes. Not talk of India. The India is the most arrogant country which I have seen in the council. The Indian Solicitor General in the 3rd UPR was on record telling to the council that we don't need any external advices. We have our own mechanisms and all that. And India did not allow even a single special rapporteur. India was asked to facilitate the visits of special rapporteurs who have already requested government of India to give them access to India and the Indian occupied Kashmir to assess the situation. But in last 4.5 years, India did not allow a single human rights special rapporteur to visit the India or Indian occupied Kashmir. Similarly, India did not ratify any of the conventions which she had already committed, and also the government of India instead more made more stringent the UAPA and used it against the political opponents, political dissidents, human rights defenders, and journalists across India and especially in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. I was going through details of that, how many Indian human rights defenders, political leaders of different ethnic and religious groups who have been put behind the bars for raising voice for their rights. Now we see that people are dying in the jails because of being not provided the facility.
Exactly.
So
One
this
is
is
of
the Indian yeah.
yeah, one is of when we talk about obviously UPR, this review report, of course, when it comes to Kashmir, do you not think that it should be a separate report rather than having the whole India's report? Because if we talk about India, the rest of India situation out there is very different. But when we talk about Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, of course, it is most militarized zone, number one, and number two, there is no media access. Even the social media is barred, and we do not get any updates from within. So it would not be possible to have the same sort of terms and conditions of UPR for Kashmir, Indian illegally occupied Kashmir as well. And if we talk about India at large, of course, UPR has been finding out that there are so many anomalies within the system that are allowing racism, number one, and number two, of course, extrajudicial murders are out there. Everything is happening in today's India, and of course, we know that against Muslims, against Christians, Sikhs, Dalits as well. Dalits, they consider themselves as Hindus. But when we talk about Kashmir and Jammu and Kashmir, of course, that is entirely a different side, and there should be a separate mechanism that ensures that India is in compliance with it?
You see, this is a very good thinking that there should be a separate report for it. But unfortunately, under UN systems, there is no provision for that at present. Unfortunately for us, it's also that during this fourth cycle of UPR, we do not have the Kurum Parvez or any of the civil society actors being allowed in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir to document or to send the information to the UPR processes or to the UN special rapporteurs. It was because of this you could see only one submission from the Kashmiri groups to this this time to the stakeholder summary. That is from the Kashmir Institute of International Relations, because all the civil society actors in occupied Kashmir who would report to the UN, who would document the human rights violations, who would see all this, they are behind the bars or their offices have been closed and they are facing the reprisal at the hands of the Indian government. The UN special rapporteurs and all those have made a huge hue and cry. They have written a number of communications to the government of India on these. But unfortunately, the United Nations human rights mechanism is what I always say, is a toothless body. They don't have the teeth to bite. The teeth to bite lies in the Security Council. They lie in the General Assembly, where the big powers, they have just used the human rights as a pretext for their own purposes. When it comes to Ukraine, they can put sanctions on Soviet Union, but when it comes to Kashmir, for the last 70 years, India has occupied it, India has invaded it, India has illegally invaded it, but there is no accountability
Excellent
for
point.
India. This is always, I always speak even on the podium of the UN that this UPR process is like you scratch my back, I scratch your back. The countries just they ask the member state that you should do this, you should do, because all this process is legalistic, that you have to improve your legal frameworks for different kinds, for different sections of society, for the child rights, for the civil and political rights, for the rule of law and all that. So you have to make the legal recommendations. But when it comes to implementation, India doesn't even move on those legal recommendations. You may be amazed that from 1992, India says that we are looking at the Convention Against Torture, because Convention Against Torture, the torture is the basic for all the human rights violations that are being perpetrated anywhere or in Indian occupied Kashmir or in the mainland India. That's why India doesn't ratify it. But they take the plea that it's in our parliament will pass it with reservations, with this and that, but they have not passed it. It's from 1992 in the Indian parliament, but the Indian parliament doesn't pass it. So this is the way that at the same kind, when the Indians accepted the resolutions on Kashmir, and then they, on one hand, they submitted their military occupation in Kashmir, and then started calling Kashmir an integral part. The same thing India is doing at United Nations. They say, okay, we accept this, this is okay, we note this. But at the end, when the Indian response comes from the top hierarchy of India, they say we don't need any external advices. We have our own mechanisms to deal. So this is time for the international community. If a country has its own mechanism to deal with things, why she is a part of the United Nations Human Rights Council. Why she is
Right.
part of the global body? That she should be kicked out of this. Unfortunately, there is a mechanism for this. That if a country doesn't comply with the UN systems, its
They can
membership
be
should be kept.
affected,
So,
but that hasn't happened. One is one question from me as well regarding the whole Kashmir debate. I understand that a part of it is regarding the UN systems and how it approaches the matter. The other one, of course, is how India's institutions keep on failing to protect people. And that's why we are seeing these reports. One we are going to see tomorrow. Let me ask you regarding India's pivotal institution or judiciary, because you were talking about legalistic system. Indian judiciary has failed to take up the matter of abolition of Kashmir's identity for past 3 years. Now, let me ask you, today we have seen change of guard at India's Supreme Court. Justice Chandrachud has taken over, and he is going to be there for 2 years, and he is considered to be very conscientious and a very vocal man. Do you think that there is a possibility that there might come some kind of reset in the system?
To be very honest, and if from the BJP is there for last I think 8-9 years is they're in power, and they have converted each and every institution to their own mindset. Each and every constitution is run by, or they are being guided by the Hindutva ideology, be that judiciary, be that military, be that executive, and other things. But having said that, I have seen the Indian judiciary never been sympathetic to people of Indian occupied Kashmir. You can go back to late 84 when MAQBOOL Bhatt was hanged in a false case, and then when Afzal Guru was hanged, and the Indians at that time Chief Justice in the verdict said that there is no circumstantial evidence against him, but in order to satisfy the general conscience of the people of India, he has to be given the highest. So when it comes to the Kashmir, Indian judiciary has its different attitude. When it comes to the Kashmir, they take a different sides. And you see, from last 3 years, they are not hearing a case on Kashmir of Article 370 and 35A and others. And when it comes to the other things, there they just swing in
Right,
and they
absolutely.
take the supermoto action.
Vani Sahab, unfortunately, we're out of time, but thank you very much for speaking with us and sharing your views, and of course, being a strong voice for the people of Kashmir. And the struggle, unfortunately, continues, and we really hope that we see some sort of consequence to what is going on within India, and that the review tomorrow contributes towards an international response that is appropriate to what is going on. That's all that we have from the debate. We'll see you tomorrow.